Imagine for a second discovering that a single, slightly blurry JPEG file from like 2012 could suddenly entitle you to 80,000 euros in back rent.
Right, which sounds completely insane.
It sounds like a scam. But today, we are taking a deep dive into a 9-year-old deception that was basically just hiding in plain sight.
Hiding in a highly customized, meticulously constructed, high-tech art gallery, no less.
Exactly. A gallery that is quietly rotting from the inside out. And to unpack this, we have a really fascinating set of sources. We're looking at a document titled Tragic Real-Life Situation of a 49-Year-Old Artist After 9 Years of Paying Rent.
Yeah, and what makes this deep dive so unique is that we aren't just looking at the legal facts of his situation.
No, we're looking at the consensus of 13 different artificial intelligences.
Right, which is just a wild approach.
I mean, we're talking about huge models here. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, DeepSeek, Grok, Mistral, Amazon Nova, all of them.
All fed the exact same, highly specific, deeply emotional dispute.
And they were asked to navigate this insane legal, financial, and honestly strategic labyrinth to save this artist from ruin.
It's essentially like watching an algorithmic Supreme Court convene over a collapsing residential loft.
That's the perfect way to put it. And to really grasp the sheer weight of the legal conclusions these AI models reached, I think we first need to understand the physical space, right?
Absolutely. The architecture and the contract are everything here.
Because if you just glanced at the lease, it looks pretty standard at first. It says it's a residential unit meant for a maximum of 2 people.
But then you read the customized usage clause.
Right. And that is where the whole legal standard of the agreement just like shifts dramatically.
Just a huge pivot.
The contract explicitly says the space is for, quote, assembly and exhibition room for self-designed luminaires of the company / living for Mr. Tenant as boss of his company.
And that single sentence redefines the entire legal battleground.
How so? Like in practical terms for the listener.
Well, in German contract law, this moves you completely out of those standard residential protections.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it pushes you into a mixed-use commercial space, and specifically one with a heavy emphasis on representation.
Representation meaning like showing off the business.
Exactly. When a landlord signs a lease that openly acknowledges the space as a commercial exhibition room, they are legally binding themselves to a much higher standard.
They can't just treat it like a place where some guy sleeps.
Right. They have to guarantee a level of structural integrity that can actually support a public-facing premium business.
They are essentially warranting that the environment won't embarrass a commercial presentation.
Which is a heavy burden, especially given what this 49-year-old artist actually built in there.
Oh, man, yeah. The execution of this gallery is just staggering. He didn't just, buy a few track lights from a hardware store.
Far from it.
He transformed over 100 square meters of this loft into a bespoke interactive LED exhibition.
The source text mentions over 100 custom pieces, right?
Yeah, he calls them unusual light objects, or ULOs.
I love that acronym.
It's great. And these are highly specific floor, standing, and hanging installations.
And to support all that, he had to bring in some serious infrastructure.
Right. He installed 3 professional Hofmeister rail systems.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, Hofmeister systems are not just pretty lights.
No, they are architectural-grade infrastructure.
Exactly. They require serious load-bearing calculations. You need precise electrical integration.
They aren't just aesthetic afterthoughts. They basically become part of the building's nervous system.
He fundamentally integrated his entire life's work into the physical structure of the landlord's property.
And he went way beyond the lighting, too. He customized 2 major walls with these 3D plastic panels.
Wow.
Yeah, and then he completely transformed a massive central wall with 3D styrofoam stone imitations just to get, very specific textural lighting effects.
That sounds incredibly expensive.
It is. And he added large-scale 3D wallpaper. He basically built a premium, highly stylized environment to attract this very specific international demographic.
Right, wealthy clients from that tri-border area of Switzerland, France, and Germany.
But, playing devil's advocate for a second, look at this from a strict property perspective.
Okay, sure.
He took a residential loft and voluntarily sank what has to be tens of thousands of euros into 3D walls and commercial lighting grids.
Yeah, it's a massive overcapitalization for a rental.
Exactly. Isn't that on him?
Yeah.
It seems perfectly reasonable for the landlord to just say, hey, I shouldn't be liable for the destruction of luxury upgrades you chose to install at your own risk.
I mean, if you build $1 million gallery in a rented apartment, you sort of assume the risk of the environment, right?
Yeah, that's what I would think.
And that is exactly the standard defense you would expect a landlord to mount. But the AI models unanimously dismantled that argument.
Really? All 13 of them?
Yes. They zeroed right in on the contractual text. Models like DeepSeek and Claude specifically drilled into this concept of assumed risk versus contractual guarantee.
Oh, because of the specific clause we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Because the landlord explicitly authorized the exhibition room purpose in writing, she actively absorbed the liability for the space being suitable for that purpose.
Wow. So she can't backtrack.
No. The AIs pointed out that German law does not let a landlord grant a commercial usage right and then hide behind standard residential maintenance standards.
I see. So if you agree to host a high-end gallery, you guarantee a building envelope that won't destroy high-end gallery.
That's the baseline. You promised a gallery space, you have to deliver a gallery space.
But the problem with a bespoke gallery-grade installation is that it needs a gallery-grade foundation.
And this building definitely did not have that.
No. After 9 years of operating in this space, the artist finally looks past his LED installations and looks up at the actual ceiling.
And that's when the legal definition of the space starts to literally collapse.
He notices a new roof defect. Water is just coming right in.
Which is terrifying when you have 100 custom electronics plugged in.
Right. But his immediate reaction to this is just a masterclass in legal self-preservation.
It really is. Most people would panic and make a mistake here.
He doesn't withhold his rent completely, which is what a lot of people might do, but that would put him in breach of contract.
Yeah, you never just stop paying without a legal framework.
Instead, he pays his rent, but he attaches this specific legal caveat to the transfer. Unter Vorbehalt.
Right, under reservation.
Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, it's a really powerful mechanism in German tenancy law. It effectively freezes the legal status quo.
The AIs flagged this too, didn't they?
They did. Models like Quen and Grok highlighted this as his pivotal tactical move. By paying unter Vorbehalt, the tenant explicitly signals that, yes, he is fulfilling his payment obligation so he doesn't get evicted.
Right, covering his bases.
But he does not acknowledge the landlord's right to actually keep that money.
So it preserves his right to claw those funds back later.
Exactly. It preserves the right to demand it back retroactively once the underlying defect is actually dealt with in court.
That is so smart. It shifts the pressure entirely onto the landlord.
And she definitely feels that pressure.
Oh, for sure. Because initially, she just denied the defect outright.
Classic landlord move.
But that restricted, legally precarious cash flow forces her to eventually send a professional roofer to look at the leak.
And that single visit by the roofer completely shatters her defense.
It does, because the roofer's inspection prompts the artist to finally really scrutinize the underlying bones of this loft that he's lived in for almost a decade.
And what he finds is, well, it's horrifying.
The source text outlines this terrifying discovery of what they call in German Bopfusch.
Basically, severe botched construction work.
Yeah, the physical reality of the bidding was entirely incompatible with what was promised in the contract.
What exactly did he uncover?
Oh, everything. Deep water stains, serious structural cracks, and massive mold formation.
All driven by what?
Fundamentally flawed insulation and faulty ceiling, because it's a badly built space.
And the AI models, when they processed this, they immediately split their analysis into two distinct liability tracks.
Which were?
The biological threat and the commercial threat.
Okay, let's talk about the biological threat first, because that is critical here. The source text explicitly mentions that this 49-year-old tenant is a severe allergy sufferer.
Right, which elevates the mold from being just an ugly nuisance on the wall to an aggressive, localized pathogen.
It's actively harming him.
Mistral and Minimax, two of the AI models, focused heavily on this specific detail.
Because it affects the living part of the contract.
Precisely. A severe allergen in a residential space completely nullifies the living portion of that agreement.
Because you can't safely live there.
Right. The landlord is contractually obligated to provide a space where the tenant can safely exist. The mold makes the apartment a persistent health hazard.
And under the German Civil Code, creating a health hazard is like one of the most severe breaches a landlord can commit, right?
Absolutely. It gives the tenant massive leverage.
But then, parallel to that health hazard, you have the total destruction of the commercial utility.
Yeah, the gallery aspect.
You have these bespoke ULOs, which are designed for, wealthy Swiss and French art collectors sitting in a room that suddenly smells like a neglected, damp basement.
the physical environment is actively repelling the target demographic.
Exactly. No one wants to buy high-end art in a moldy room. The AI model Ernie pointed out that the context of the presentation completely ruins the perceived value of the product.
That makes total sense.
The decay doesn't just damage the drywall, it financially damages the artist's brand and his revenue stream.
So up to this point in the source material, the AI analysis is treating this as a severe but ultimately standard maintenance dispute.
Right. Landlords fail to maintain the building, resulting in structural and commercial failure. Happens all the time.
But then the entire legal paradigm just violently shifts.
Yes. This is my favorite part of the document. This is when the tenant does some digging and discovers the landlady's original real estate listing photos.
The photos from 2012 and 2015.
Yes. He finds the actual digital marketing materials she used to lure him into signing the lease 9 years ago.
And what does he see in those photos?
Visible in her own photographs, clear as day, is the major structural defect and the botched construction. Yeah. She didn't just neglect a new leak that popped up recently. She knew the building was structurally compromised before he ever signed the lease.
And she actively hid that reality from him.
Exactly. And this is the exact moment the 13 AI models stopped analyzing a simple maintenance dispute and started processing potential fraud.
It's a huge escalation. They all unanimously zeroed in on a specific devastating legal concept in the German Civil Code.
Arglistiges Verschweigen.
Malicious concealment.
I want to break this down for you listening because it's so important. Think of Arglistiges Verschweigen like avoided warranty.
Okay, good analogy.
If you buy a used car and you see a scratch on the door, you own that scratch. You accepted the vehicle as is.
Right, you saw it, you signed anyway.
But if the dealer intentionally painted over structural rust just to hide a decaying frame, the law says that the as-is contract is completely burned to the ground.
Because it was formed on a lie.
Exactly. The landlady's 2012 listing photos were essentially the fresh paint covering the rust.
And the AI models referenced sections 536 and 536A of the BGB, the German Civil Code, to explain exactly how this incinerates the landlord's legal defenses.
No, so?
Well, normally a tenant cannot claim a rent reduction for a defect that was easily visible or known at the time of signing.
Because the law assumes you factored that flaw into your negotiated rent.
Exactly. But malicious concealment overrides everything.
Because she hid it.
Right. By proving she knew about the botched construction, the Baupfusch, and withheld that info to get his signature, she loses every ounce of contractual protection.
So if Arglistiges Verschweigen voids all her liability exclusions, mathematically, that implies his right to reduce rent doesn't just start from the day he complained about the recent leak.
Oh, no, not at all.
It rewinds the clock all the way back to day one of the lease.
Which is 9 years ago.
Over 9 years.
Yeah.
That is a catastrophic financial exposure for the landlord.
It really is.
If he's paying a standard commercial rate, a 50% reduction stretching back over 100 months is tens of thousands of euros instantly owed back to the artist.
It fundamentally alters the balance of power in this dispute.
But it gets worse for her, doesn't it?
It does.
Okay.
The AIs, specifically Gemini and DeepSeek, pointed out that the retroactive rent reduction is actually the smaller financial threat.
Wait, really? Tens of thousands of euros is the smaller threat.
Yeah, because Section 536A of the BGB governs Schadensersatz, or damages.
Okay.
And crucially, when a defect is present at the time the contract is concluded, and especially when it is maliciously concealed, the landlord is subject to strict liability.
Okay, strict liability. So that means it bypasses the need to prove ongoing negligence for every individual leak over the years.
Precisely. Strict liability means the landlord guarantees the space is defect-free at the moment of handover.
Which we know it wasn't.
Right. Since it wasn't, she is strictly liable for any damages that flow directly from that initial concealed flaw.
So she is on the hook for the total destruction of the commercial space.
Everything.
The bespoke 3D walls, the ruined track lighting, the ULOs.
Because the financial investment the artist made was based on the fraudulent premise that the space was structurally sound.
DeepSeek took this even further, didn't it? It analyzed the potential for Entgänger Gewinn.
Oh, profit.
Yeah. If the artist can demonstrate through his ledger that the pervasive smell of dampness and the visible decay actively drove away his high-net-worth clientele from the tri-border area.
Then the landlady's liability expands to cover the income he should have made over those 9 years.
Which is just staggering. The chain of causation established by the AI models is incredibly tight here.
Let's trace it out.
Okay, so the malicious concealment led to the execution of the contract.
Right.
The contract led to the massive capital investment by the artist.
Yes.
The concealed defect inevitably ruined the physical space.
And the ruined physical space destroyed the capital investment and the revenue stream.
Therefore, the landlord is liable for the entire chain of destruction.
It's flawless logic.
For anyone listening, this scenario is just the ultimate proof of why digital hoarding can literally save your life.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you've ever signed a commercial lease, your instinct is usually to just file the paperwork away in a drawer and trust the process.
You don't think to save the Zillow listing from 10 years ago?
But this entire legal tactical nuke is powered by a 14-year-old JPEG.
Yep.
Documenting the initial state of agreement, saving every email, scraping the original listing photos. It is the absolute foundation of any future claim.
Because the burden of proof in civil litigation is usually the hardest hurdle to clear.
Right. Proving what someone knew a decade ago is almost impossible normally.
But the AI models recognized that the tenant bypassed that massive hurdle simply by archiving the landlord's own marketing material.
Her own digital footprint dismantled her defense a decade later.
Poetic justice.
Okay, so we have 13 AI models in absolute agreement that the landlord is liable for a massive retroactive rent reduction.
Yes.
But this presents a really fascinating analytical challenge.
How so?
Well, how do algorithms that are designed around rigid logic and math calculate a hard percentage for ruined art, a compromised immune system, and a destroyed commercial aesthetic?
It's a great question, and this is where we see the most significant divergence in how the different large language models process legal principles.
Because calculating a Mietminderung, a rent reduction, isn't an exact science, right?
Not at all. In German law, it relies heavily on judicial discretion and precedent. There's no fixed table.
So the AIs had to synthesize massive databases of past court rulings and then apply them to this highly specific hybrid lease.
Exactly, and the breakdown of their math is incredibly revealing.
They started by establishing a structural baseline.
Right. For a leaking roof and water stains in a commercial residential space, the models consistently cited a baseline reduction of 10 to 30%.
That makes sense. That accounts for the physical inconvenience and the immediate loss of, usable square footage.
Then they layered on the biological hazard.
The mold.
Yeah, and especially given the documented severe allergies of the tenant, the reduction percentages spiked aggressively.
Because health hazards scale non-linearly in German courts, right?
They do. The models assess the mold at a 15 to 50% reduction, depending on the severity of the outbreak and its proximity to where he actually sleeps.
And finally, they factored in the commercial destruction.
The aesthetic ruin of the gallery.
The fact that an international LED art gallery now looked like a disaster zone, the models applied an additional 10 to 20% penalty for that.
Treating it as a fundamental breach of that exhibition room clause.
Right. But if you look at that raw data, there's a glaring mathematical trap there.
I see where you're going with this.
30% for the roof, 50% for the mold, 20% for the ruined aesthetic.
That equals 100%.
Exactly. Does he just live there for free?
Models like ChatGPT and Minimax explicitly warned against this. It's called the additive fallacy.
Okay, explain that.
Legal algorithms, when they are properly aligned with German jurisprudence, know that you cannot simply stack defect percentages until you reach zero rent.
Because the defects are synergistic.
Exactly. The leaky roof caused the dampness caused the mold ruined the aesthetic.
You can't penalize the landlord 3 separate times for the exact same drop of water.
Right. The court looks at the entire ruined environment holistically and assigns a single aggregate value of, suckiness.
I love that, a legal value of suckiness.
Yeah.
So what was the consensus among the models regarding that aggregate value?
It was remarkably tight, actually. Models like Grok, Amazon Nova, and Ernie landed on a highly defensible target of a 40 to 60% reduction.
With 50% kind of emerging as the median recommendation?
Yeah. And Ernie actually demonstrated the most granular approach of all of them.
What did Ernie do?
It parsed the physical space, estimated that roughly 35% of the loft was dedicated to residential living and 65% to the commercial gallery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then it weighted the specific defects against those zones and outputted a hyper-specific suggested reduction of 47.75%.
47.75%. That is exactly what you want from an AI analyzing a legal text. Taking abstract judicial principles and giving you a mathematically justified starting point for negotiation.
It's incredibly useful. But we do have to talk about the outliers.
Yes, because this is where the cultural and structural differences in the AI training data really showed up.
Quinn and DeepSeek.
Both Chinese-developed models.
Yeah.
And they took a drastically more aggressive stand.
They did. While the Western models aim for that balanced precedent-based reduction around 50%, Quinn and DeepSeek argued something else entirely.
What was their argument?
They argued that if the space is completely unusable for public exhibitions and simultaneously hazardous to the tenant's health, pushing for an 80% to 100% reduction for specific periods is a totally valid legal posture.
100% reduction. That's massive.
Yeah.
Why the massive discrepancy? Is it just a hallucination in the AI?
Not necessarily. Or are they applying a different philosophical lens to contract law?
That's what I was wondering.
It likely stems from how these models weight fundamental breaches of contract in their specific training data.
Okay.
In some jurisdictions, if the primary purpose of a commercial contract is completely frustrated, meaning the space generates zero commercial value and actively harms the occupancy.
The contract is essentially viewed as voided for that period.
Exactly, driving the value to zero. They applied a highly punitive logic. The landlord delivered negative value, therefore the tenant owes zero compensation.
Which makes logical sense.
It does, even though a German court might view 100% as excessively punitive unless the place is completely uninhabitable. But the AI's logic highlights the absolute severity of the breach.
You know, the artist's prompt to the AIs included a very specific question that I found really interesting.
The one about the art?
Yes. He asked how this, quote, particular artistic circumstance would be evaluated in court.
He was emotionally invested.
Very. He wanted to know if the unique, highly personal nature of his ULOs and his life's work would sway the legal calculations.
And the response from the AIs on this point was just a masterclass in the cold, objective reality of the law.
It was brutal, honestly. Models like Claude and ChatGPT stripped the emotion entirely from the equation.
They clarified that the law simply does not care about the artistic merit of the ULOs.
It doesn't factor in the passion, the late nights, or the emotional devastation of seeing the art ruined.
The law views the art purely as a commercial metric.
Exactly. The high rent reduction isn't awarded because the art is uniquely beautiful or culturally significant.
It is awarded because the landlord contracted to provide a premium showroom and failed to do so.
The artistic circumstance only matters legally because it established the baseline requirement of the physical space.
Right. If he were selling, say, industrial tractor parts in that loft, a water stain might not impact sales at all.
And the reduction would be much lower.
But because he is selling premium, aesthetic-driven lighting, the water stain completely destroys the commercial utility.
The AIs utilize the artist's passion not as an emotional lever for a judge, but as a rigid metric to calculate the exact loss of utility.
It's very clinical.
So we have this perfectly constructed algorithmic diagnosis. The landlord engaged in malicious concealment. The space is a biological and commercial hazard.
The tenant is legally entitled to claw back roughly half of his rent over a 9-year period, plus seek massive damages for his destroyed investments.
The logical mathematical output is glaringly obvious, right?
The tenant should initiate litigation, demand his money, pack up whatever ULOs are salvageable, and immediately vacate the toxic environment.
That is the optimal solution if you are optimizing solely for financial recovery and health preservation.
Which is what AIs do.
But the source document reveals a deeply human variable that the algorithms really struggle to process.
The prompt.
Yes. The artist explicitly stated in his prompt to the AIs, he wants to stay.
Which is wild. He wants to remain in the mold-infested, structurally compromised loft.
Owned by a landlord who actively defrauded him for a decade.
Yeah. He wants to use the legal system to force her to renovate the building around him while he continues to live and work inside it.
And the text notes he is plagued by this deep psychological doubt. He is terrified that leaving means admitting his 9-year endeavor was a total failure.
So the AIs had to pivot. They had to go from parsing the German civil code to essentially navigating the sunk cost fallacy.
Because the artist's identity and his life's work are physically bolted to the landlord's ceiling and glued to the landlord's walls.
So walk away is to mathematically finalize that loss.
But the AI models, specifically Mistral and Quinn, issued these stark, super-rational warnings against this emotional anchor.
They warned him that staying guarantees a perpetual war of attrition.
Right. A landlord who has ignored structural decay for a decade, who lied to secure the lease in the first place.
And who only responds when her cash flow is legally choked off.
is not going to suddenly execute a flawless high-end renovation because a court tells her to.
No, she's going to do the absolute minimum. The models utilize the exact German terminology for what he can expect. Flick work.
Patchwork.
Yes. If forced by a court, she will do the bare minimum required to lift the rent reduction.
She will paint over the mold rather than remediate the actual insulation.
She'll patch the roof leak rather than replace the membrane.
The AIs recognize the behavioral pattern of the landlord and projected it forward. They warned the tenant that his life's work will essentially be held hostage by her malicious compliance.
So if the algorithms recognize that staying is an irrational, high-risk move, how do they advise him to achieve his goal?
Right. How does he force a massive structural renovation if he absolutely refuses to walk away?
The AIs identified that his only true point of leverage is the credible threat of departure.
They pointed him toward the mechanism of an außerordentliche Kündigung.
An extraordinary, notice-free termination of the lease.
Because the severe mold constitutes an acute health hazard, he has the absolute right to break the lease immediately.
Without observing the standard 3-month notice periods.
But wait, if he exercises that right, he has to leave, which defeats his entire goal of staying.
Ah, but he doesn't have to execute the termination immediately. He just has to weaponize the threat of it.
I see.
The AIs analyze the power dynamics here. If he simply begs for repairs because he loves the space too much to leave, the landlord holds all the power.
She knows he won't leave, so she can take her time.
Exactly. But if he formally establishes the legal grounds for an extraordinary termination, he puts a gun to the head of her revenue stream.
He dictates the terms.
Yes. He says, execute a comprehensive professional renovation immediately, or I walk out tomorrow, terminate the lease, and tie you up in a decade-long lawsuit for retroactive rent and strict liability damages.
Wow. The willingness to abandon the sunk cost is literally the only mechanism that provides the leverage to save it.
It's brilliant strategy.
The synthesis of these 13 AI models provides an incredibly dense, highly aggressive tactical playbook.
It's a step-by-step escalation matrix.
Designed to systematically dismantle the landlord's position. Let's run through it.
It starts with weaponizing the rent he has been paying under Vorbehalt.
Step 1 is maximizing the immediate financial pain.
Right. He cannot simply continue paying the full amount under reservation. The AIs advise him to immediately implement the 40% to 50% rent reduction.
He must starve the uncooperative landlord of cash to force her to the negotiating table.
However, he must do this with clinical precision.
He can't just short the rent. He has to document in writing exactly which defects correspond to which percentage of the reduction, explicitly citing the breach of the commercial exhibition clause.
Step 2 addresses the evidentiary burden.
Because right now, the only professional who has evaluated this space is the roofer hired by the landlord.
And you can never, ever rely on the opposition's contractor to provide an objective assessment of the opposition's liability.
No. The models unanimously demanded the immediate hiring of an independent Bauverständiger,
a certified building appraiser.
This is critical for securing the chain of evidence. The appraiser must thoroughly document the Bautfusch, the extent of the water intrusion, and the root cause of the mold.
But most importantly, the appraiser must formally evaluate those 2012 listing photos.
Ah, yes. They have to certify that the defects present today are the exact same defects visible in the landlord's marketing materials.
Because that independent verification is what locks in the Arglistiges Verschweigen claim, the fraud claim.
In parallel to the building appraisal, he needs an independent appraisal of his own health.
Right, the allergies.
He requires a specialized medical certificate unequivocally linking his severe allergic reactions to the specific mold spores present in the loft.
That document is the linchpin that validates the threat of the extraordinary termination. It proves the biological hazard isn't subjective, it's a documented medical fact.
Okay, so once the evidentiary baseline is secured, step 3 is the ultimatum.
The tenant must serve the landlord with a formal written notice demanding professional, comprehensive repairs.
Accompanied by a strict, legally reasonable deadline. And the notice must explicitly state that flickwork patchwork will not be accepted.
Given her history, the assumption is that she will blow past the deadline or just send someone to slap a coat of paint on the mold.
And when she inevitably breaches the deadline, the AIs unlock the final tactical maneuver.
Selbstvornehmen.
Self-remediation.
Under German tenancy law, if a landlord ignores a formal deadline to repair a severe defect, the tenant is empowered to basically take control of the physical space.
The artist can independently hire the professional contractors required to execute the structural repairs, replace the roof membrane, and properly remediate the mold.
But we're talking about structural roof repairs and commercial-grade mold remediation.
That requires immense capital. The artist would have to front tens of thousands of euros.
He does front the capital, yes, but the brilliance of the Selbstvornahme mechanism is how the tenant is reimbursed.
How does that work?
He takes the total invoice for the professional repairs and deducts it directly from his remaining rent.
Just subtracts it.
Yep. If the remediation costs 30,000 euros, the artist effectively lives in the space rent-free until the entire 30,000 euros is recouped.
Oh, wow. He forces the landlord to involuntarily finance the repair of her own building through the total forfeiture of her rental income.
It is a devastating legal maneuver that completely bypasses the landlord's refusal to act.
But, and this is a huge but, executing a rent reduction, establishing grounds for extraordinary termination, invoking strict liability damages, and executing a massive Selbstvornahme deduction.
It's a lot of plates to keep spinning.
If he makes one procedural error, one miscalculation on a deadline, he flips from being the victim of fraud to being in breach of contract himself.
Which is precisely why every single one of the 13 AI models, without exception, concluded their analysis with the exact same directive.
Do not attempt to execute this playbook alone.
Exactly. The complexity of arguing malicious concealment based on decade-old digital artifacts, all within the framework of a mixed-use commercial contract, is immense.
The AIs unanimously advise the immediate retention of a Fachenwald von Matrix,
A board-certified specialist in tenancy law.
The algorithms essentially mapped the entire battlefield. They calculated the financial trajectories, they identified the landlord's vulnerabilities, and drafted the escalation matrix.
But they recognized their own operational limit.
They provided the strategy, but they demanded a human specialist to execute the war.
It really highlights the current utility of legal AI, doesn't it?
It does. It is an unparalleled diagnostic tool. It can instantly synthesize the German civil code, cross-reference it with the specifics of Hofmeister rail installations and 2012 JPEGs, and output a highly accurate risk assessment.
But it cannot negotiate with a hostile landlord in person.
Right. It cannot file the injunctions, and it cannot navigate the procedural nuances of a physical German courtroom.
You need a human for that.
You know, for you listening, this entire deep dive is a profound lesson in the mechanics of leverage and documentation.
It really is.
If you rent a commercial space, you must hold the counterparty to the strict legal definition of that space.
If they promise a premium exhibition room, you do not accept the structural integrity of a damp basement.
You utilize the legal framework to enforce the standard you contracted for.
And, maybe most importantly, you meticulously archive every piece of data from the inception of the relationship.
The fact that this entire intricate legal strategy, the retroactive rent, the strict liability, the voided defenses, rests entirely on the tenant's ability to produce a 14-year-old real estate listing photo.
It is the ultimate testament to the power of the digital paper trail.
The truth of the baseline conditions is the only armor that matters when a contract collapses.
Absolutely.
It is a masterclass in algorithmic legal analysis. We watched 13 artificial intelligences perfectly deconstruct the rigid logic of tenancy law, calculate the exact financial weight of a ruined art gallery, and build a flawless tactical roadmap for legal salvation.
They perform their function with cold, mathematical precision.
But as we close this analysis, there is a lingering friction that the source document leaves unresolved.
The emotional core of it all.
Yeah. The AIs processed the facts, they applied the law, and provided the optimal solution. But they had to navigate around the one variable they cannot compute, the one factor that defied their algorithmic logic: human emotional attachment.
The math clearly dictates that the artist should weaponize his evidence, secure his financial compensation, and abandon the toxic environment.
But the artist's identity is inextricably bound to the physical space he spent a decade building.
So I guess the question is, what do you do?
Yeah. If an aggregate of the world's most advanced analytical engines mathematically proves that your life's work is currently anchored in a structurally ruined, financially toxic environment orchestrated by a deceitful landlord, at what point do you stop listening to the desperate sunk cost rationalizations of your own heart and surrender to the cold, undeniable